Welcome to Blair County's source for workers' compensation conversation. It's the wide, wide world of workers' comp. What is workers' comp? How does it affect me? What are the workers' comp issues locally and throughout the state of Pennsylvania? Learn the perspective of workers' comp from employers, employees, insurance carriers, third-party administrators, case managers, safety directors, the State Department of Labor and Industry, elected officials, physicians, and business owners. I'm Jim Gregory. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the wide, wide world of workers' comp.
Hello and welcome to the first edition of the wide, wide world of workers' comp. And when it comes to topics that you've not heard much about, I would imagine that at the top of the list is workers' compensation. So why have a conversation about it? The thinking is that all folks know about workers' compensation is whether or not they've been exposed to it because they've been injured, or they've seen a commercial from an attorney telling them if they need money, they can get money for you. So we're going to talk about workers' compensation for the next half hour and how it pertains to Blair County, whether it pertains to employers, employees, businesses, industries, the healthcare side of things, the insurance side of things, and the business side of things regarding, well, ownership and also the participation of a company like HealthSouth. And Becky Winkler is here joining us to open the show, as well as the president of ProCare Physical Therapy, Jim Foreman. Becky, as a director of outpatient, you've been involved in workers' comp for 23 years. If you don't mind, I'm going to start with you. Over the last 23 years, when I look at the equipment involved in workers' comp and work hardening, getting employees back to work safely, getting them back to work quickly, this looks very primitive. Has it changed over 23 years in your estimation?
It has changed somewhat, but sometimes what's old is new again. Mm-hmm. And with the types of jobs that we see, particularly in Blair County, these tools are necessary for people to get back to doing their regular duty and being able just to get back to be a productive member of the workforce. So in my estimation, I'm not a clinician, but these are the tools that we still use.
And we'll hear from a clinician a little bit later in the show. He brought the tools in. Jim, I mean, this is still very primitive. You've been involved in ProCare and workers' comp for over 20 years, about 20 years, 21 years. In your estimation, how has it changed in the state and in Blair County?
Yeah. The tools and the equipment aside, I feel as though the employers have really become more aware of the attributes of the workplace and how to address things proactively instead of just allowing an injury to occur and pushing it off to the insurance company. We're seeing a lot more employer engagement on trying to understand what makes up a job and how to prevent an injury from occurring, and when an injury occurs, who to go to, and how to implement a program that can get them back to work safe and in a sustainable fashion. So I think it's been good in Blair County.
When you talk about what it's been like, the ability to tell employers and try and get them engaged in that process, what are some of the key words that you feel get employers to pay attention? Is it paying attention because it affects the bottom line? Is it paying attention because they care about their employees? Is it that plus other things?
I think it's a combination of all those things. I think people are more fiscally concerned now, so they're worried about their bottom line. But I mean, as a business, it's better off if they have more productive people. And if one way to be productive is when you show your employees you care. So if just from the onset you have a really good panel of providers for them, so that they're getting the best medical care in Blair County, I think that's helps.
Yep.
Yeah, I hear to Becky's comments. I feel as though most, if not all, of the employers in Blair County, many of them are family-oriented businesses or derive from a family-oriented business, and I think they've been reasonable about striking a balance between taking care of the employee but also watching the bottom line. And certainly, Jim, there are outliers, and you hear scenarios of this case or that case, and it sounds egregious or whatever, but those are really in the minority. The majority, and I think I can speak for Becky as well as for us, the majority that come through get well and get well soon, and there's a lot of success stories out there.
People that might be tuning in right now are seeing the words workers' compensation on the screen and their eyes are glazing over thinking, why would I want to know any more about workers' comp? From just a viewer standpoint, an employee standpoint, there's really nothing that is taught to what an employee should know about workers' compensation. But what is it about the education maybe that employees need to know more about so that maybe they can be more engaged in that process?
May I, Becky?
Sure.
Yeah. I think every employee who's listening or a potential employee who's listening should think about their employer resources in a bucket. And that bucket means that obviously the cost of health care, and that's at the forefront of every employee and employer's mind, is that money is money. And when an employee can take a safe and proactive approach towards being well themselves and contributing, whether it's in a safety committee or helping other employees be safe, that helps a company be more profitable. Costs are costs, and when someone gets hurt, it can be expensive. And whether they're hurt in workers' compensation or whether it's on the health insurance side, those are still real dollars that flow out, and those are dollars at that point that are not available for wages and growth within the business or whatever. So I think employee awareness, it's really job preservation in a very direct way.
I agree with what Jim said.
Well, from the standpoint of getting a company to pay attention to whatever service might be provided to help manage worker injuries, how important is it to an employer to hear and know that whoever they're working with, it's important for that company to know that getting the employees back to work quickly? There's statistics out there that point out that the longer an employee is involved in workers' comp rehab, the less likely it is that they're ever going to return.
I would say, though, just to say what Jim also said, is that our employers in Blair County, I'd say 95% of them are really proactive about it. It's changed so drastically. From 20 years ago, they just would fill out a claim and throw it in a filing cabinet. And those days have changed. They're proactive, and they I'd say 95% of them have a strong return to work program already in place. And then with the things that we as providers can add to that, people are getting back to work even if it's in a sedentary duty capacity.
Right. So one of the amazing things is that when we talk about employees and return to work, there are actually two different sides of that coin. There are some who don't always want to get back to work very quickly, and then there are others that want to get back to work before they're actually ready to get back to work. And what people need to think about is both can be a detriment to a company because it's about the safety of the person next to them working in that industry. Talk about that.
We've actually had that problem with several, whether it be construction workers or nurses. In particular, those two categories, they want to do more than their limitations, what their doctor has said. So we've actually, we take a hard line in that because, like you said, they could get injured worse. So we have them review their restrictions before they're allowed to go back to the restrictions. So they know they can't do more than that. And then we also engage their supervisor in that. So the supervisor or the foreman's not asking them to do more than they're allowed.
I think one of the things that you might be able to speak to, Jim, in fact I know you can, is how many more companies are actually becoming, and Becky, I'm sure you're aware of this also, how many more companies are actually becoming involved in stretching programs and trying to avoid injuries before they happen?
I think an increasing number. I mean, one of the really good venues in Blair County has been the Altoona Blair County Chamber of Commerce, and there was a safety committee, and there are other safety organizations around, but I think getting education about pre-shift stretching or whatever. Now, one of the stigmas that exists in the workplace is the notion that stretching is for sissies, or you know, I feel a little weird about doing pre-shift stretching or whatever, and the analogies are, but you don't have a problem watching Penn State or the Steelers come out before a game and stretch. You know, they're professional athletes and they know enough to take care of their bodies. And when you characterize it against that backdrop, people let their guard down. You know, yeah, it sort of makes sense. And so, but I would add to that, I think, the idea where employers have really invested in safety managers and directors and health and wellness directors and risk managers. Those people have really been great conduits back to the workforce on a regular basis, educating the employees. Because to be very honest, when Becky gets involved, or when we get involved, usually an injury has occurred and we're sort of doing the rehab or taking care of the injury that's already occurred. If we can get, or there's resources there that you can get to help prevent those injuries that are preventable, and an employee's health and their stretching and their ability to show up and do a job safely, enter the workplace safely, it's paramount.
Beck?
Yeah, we've actually seen that sometimes. People will say, well, you know, why are the numbers a little bit lower? And it's because the employers have been more proactive in doing pre-injury things that have helped their employees, which in the end is good because it helps the employees.
And what are some of the frustrations that you face on a daily basis?
One thing that's frustrating to me is what you mentioned at the onset of this, is that, and it has changed so much for me. It used to be the rare occurrence when an employee got an attorney involved, and now I don't know if it's because of the advertisements, but I recently had one that was just, she was just within 7 days, and she had told me she had legal representation. And she was, you know, completely working and things like that. There was really no need for it. That has impacted things.
Yeah, I think I agree with Becky. I see two frustrating areas. That's one where and whether it's the employee who seeks out that, or and less you see an employer who would say, I don't care if they're hurt, I want them back to work, which is not a very redeeming characteristic for anyone to think about another person. So the litigious nature of that, it definitely has been on the rise. I think the other side has been on the carrier side. There's been an implementation of a number of networks and systems that are designed to sort of do quick, cheap, dirty workarounds towards what really is involved work. And that's taken some of the insurance carriers askew from having relationships. It's not easy work doing the rehabilitation. I mean, we're not just performing work to restorative functions or normative functions, but we're having to really understand what makes up an employee's job demands and their tasks, and you're trying to get them back to that job in a safe and sustainable fashion. That's more involved than just rehabilitating a knee to say they have a certain range of motion or something like that. When these other systems come in, they've really not focused on the restorative rehabilitative end. It's really been on the how cheap, how fast, how many shortcuts can we do to get this thing done. And that's, in our opinion, has not been a good thing for the industry.
One of the best things about workers' comp is the success stories that are produced when an occupational therapist or a physical therapist is able to get a worker back safely to work and be able to support their families. Is that your take on what you'd like to see? What's the best part of workers' comp for Health South?
For Health South, the best part is we actually had one time where the employee asked the physical therapist if they could go with them. This wasn't one when we do work site. This was a person that had a horrible concussion, and he had asked her if she could go with him that day because he was so happy that he recovered from his concussion.
That's a success story.
And I mean, it was a success story for the employee, but it also helped our therapist, because sometimes I think they, you know, sometimes can get frustrated with certain aspects of the paperwork and things like that. So it was nice.
Jim?
Agree. I think of all the jobs in the world, one of the most rewarding ones is for a therapist who sees someone come in with a deficit or dysfunction or an injury or something that they, in the back of their mind, wonder whether they're going to be permanently debilitated, and to see that person both physically and psychologically return to a place where they maybe didn't realize they could get back to. And a lot of therapists comment on that the paycheck's there, you know, that's all good, but the really helping someone, and that's why so many, if not all of them, got into the business to begin with.
Last question. It'll be a challenging one, because in 30 seconds or less, the crystal ball of workers' comp, what do you see happening?
Hope spring is eternal. I'm an optimist. One of the go forward things that I think is optimistic is I think there's a shift both in the workplace and in our society and culture towards awareness and wellness, and whether it's being driven from the insurance company or whether it's just changes that we're going through, and I think that will lay the groundwork for employees to get more involved and take on more shared responsibility about their personal health. There's no question that someone comes into a job or whatever, if they're deconditioned versus being well-conditioned as well as they can be, their ability to function and have a job that's enduring for life and a paycheck that's enduring to retirement is a big deal. And I think their participation, that's going to help them and help the employer.
All right.
My take only.
All right. Jim, thank you very much. Becky, thank you very much for joining us. That's the first segment of the wide world of workers' comp. We're going to come back with representatives from the insurance carrier industry here locally. But when we're in the break, take a look at this statistic and tell me whether or not an employer would maybe raise an eyebrow to the number that is attached to the cost of just one low back injury. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the wide world of workers' comp. Yes, we are talking workers' comp here in Blair County, and here to join me from Salim Insurance is Ray Mergis, and from the Teeter Group is Barb Hoover. And both of you have been involved in this industry for a decade or more. Give us your background in your industry, Ray, as far as workers' comp and dealing with employers in Blair County.
My background is in commercial insurance sales, so I deal with the employers on the property and casualty side, including workers' comp. So I go out and I sell the product to them and then offer them the resources that come with the carriers represent and provide to them.
Okay. Barb?
My background is in the claims and loss prevention side. Had the unique opportunity to work for an insurance carrier, an employer, and now with an insurance agency. And my role at the Teeter Group is a workers' comp specialist. So I work with our clients on their workers' comp programs, safety, loss prevention, workers' comp claims, that type of thing.
So for folks who are tuning in and watching, and whether they're an employer or an employee, this is something that they can learn a little bit about from your side of things, because what your role is making sure that the employer is paying attention to the needs of the employees, but also making sure the bottom line of the company is also being watched closely, right?
Yeah, correct. What the employers will see is if they're not paying attention, claims will directly affect the cost of the insurance, and which directly affects their expenses, which affects their profit and loss statement. So it will, if they're not paying attention, it will pop out in a hurry what's going to happen with their profit and loss. It'll be less income at the end, or less money available for them to spend on additional resources.
Barb, what are some of the dirty words out there that employers just hate to see? I can think of one, and it's recordables.
Recordables, but I think also, Jim, we had talked about what are some of the challenges in Pennsylvania.
Yes,
I think dealing with employees, new hires that come in with a pre-existing condition, and suddenly the employer is faced with a new claim, and as a result,
that wasn't their fault. It's somebody else's problem.
That is
They've
right.
now inherited, if they're not paying attention to the people they hire.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I would say that discussions relative to that pre-employment physicals and some of the things that, even your company gets involved with are crucial.
Talking about job demands analysis and post-offer pre-employment screens. Those are some of the things that are involved in the program called Fit to Work. But are there programs that companies are hearing about nationwide when they're dealing with, how important is it for a company to want to deal with a carrier more locally than somebody that's just kind of out there nationally? What are some of the advantages?
Well, I think if you're dealing with somebody locally, you have that local representation where you can get access to somebody quite easily, where if it's national, it might be further away. So you get that attention to detail from a local representation.
And that's been important for you, I know, too.
Well, absolutely, but my role with our company is to try to facilitate that relationship, whether the carrier is local or not. Work with our clients to understand workers' comp is a controllable insurance, and some obviously already are doing those things. For others, we help teach them that there are things that you can do to reduce those costs. The return, you were talking about return to work programs, the
modified duties,
modified duty, posting a physician panel. All of those things are things that we encourage all of our clients to do.
When you bring up the word panel, I think that's a very fascinating word for employers and employees. Some employers will put the panel up in the break room, and then there are some employers who don't even know where the panel is in their building. It spans the gamut. That creates challenges when you're out selling a product, but at the same time, it also creates a misunderstanding of what a panel really is and what it protects an employer from. Either one of you or both can discuss that, because I'm sure you both have thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Barb, if you want to start.
Well, you're absolutely right. I think that the use of a panel meaningfully is the important thing here. And I think that sometimes a carrier will send a panel out with the policy, and they may have used our zip code as their way of listing
Finding
those.
someone, right.
Absolutely. Depending on where that client's located, those doctors may be miles and miles away, may not be workers' comp doctors with the best outcomes, those types of things. So obviously an employer needs to make sure that they're looking at that panel. They're putting doctors on there that they can establish a relationship with. Bring those occupational doctors in, see your location, your site, what your employees do. Have them understand that your return to work program includes that modified duty, and these are the types of things that they can return to work with.
I think what Barb's talking about is that an employer should understand they are the boss of their panel. I don't know that very many understand that concept.
That's correct, Jim. The panel was used out there to try to control the cost once an injury occurs, so that you don't have an employee going to one doctor and then another doctor and another doctor, and the cost just escalates. So the carrier, most carriers prefer that a panel be used. There are carriers still out there that don't provide panels. So where we're at, we will provide a panel to the employer, and then what they need to be made aware of is they can choose which doctor they want, or if there's a doctor that, or not necessarily a doctor, yes, that is maybe not performing as well, they can be removed from the panel and somebody else replaced.
And who goes on a panel? There are 4 or 5 different specialties, maybe 6 that can go on a panel.
Well, and I think 6, and I think what's important, again, is for employers to understand what needs to be on the panel and what doesn't need to be on the panel, and also recognizing you may have a long-term relationship.
Right.
And I'm sympathetic to that, but I'm also here to talk about the outcomes of treating those injured workers, and if they have a long relationship with someone who is keeping people out longer than the estimated length of disability, who is not quick to release people to modified duty, then they need to take a look at that panel and maybe select someone, whether it's an occupational, somebody in an occupational background, or they need to make sure they have the right doctors. Sometimes they'll be quick to. Chiropractors are a good example. Some employers will say, we don't want to put a chiropractor on, yet if your people are going to treat with a chiropractor, then having a relationship with one may be a good idea.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about, off of that subject, self-insureds versus non-self-insureds. What's the percentage of the self-insureds that you work with that are in Blair County? It's not for everyone, but for them, they pay so much more attention to this subject because being self-insured means these costs come directly off the bottom line at the end of the year.
That's correct. In Blair County, the percentage of self-insured to a typical insured, which means they go through a work comp carrier and not through a third party, is very low. It's going to be usually for your larger size employers, 1,000 employees or up or 500 employees up. Right. Someone that has more of a vested interest because of the size of the company. So it's very small percentage of self-insured versus a regular
typical.
insured.
Right,
Yeah.
right. The difference for an employer, does it have to be a larger employer? Does it?
Typically, from a financial perspective, it makes more sense
To be self-insured.
And there are certain requirements from a financial perspective that you need to meet in order to do that. But there's large deductibles, there are other types of programs that the employer can take on some additional risk in their program. And you do see that, again, with usually larger employers. But I think going back to your initial statement of whether there's a difference in whether the employer needs to be more aggressive.
Yes.
I think that even those who are not self-insured, obviously their experience mod plays a part in their what they pay, their premiums. So it's important for any employer, no matter what the size, to recognize that the things that you are able or that the Act affords you in Pennsylvania, you need to take advantage of in order to lower your experience mod.
Last question. In the first segment, we heard about what the future of workers' comp may bring. From your perspective, insurance carrier perspective, what does the state of Pennsylvania perhaps need to look at to do better to keep Pennsylvania needs to grow as a business in businesses and being able to have more jobs. You have a role in helping employers be able to do that. Is there anything from your perspective, from the Department of Labor and Industry or the Department of Insurance at the state level, is there anything lobbying-wise that needs to be done for Pennsylvania to improve the climate for employers?
Barb, do you want to start with that one?
I think that continued efforts from a lobbying perspective to give employers additional freedoms to try to manage those costs, because for mid-sized companies, I think that sometimes they struggle. The cost of insurance, the cost of workers' comp insurance can be so high.
Right.
And I think that any efforts that gives or affords opportunities for employers to manage that risk is helpful.
I think the point I'm trying to make too, Ray, is that you're dealing with employers, you have relationships with them, they've been with you a long time, a lot of years. You've seen the frustrations, you've dealt with the emotions of what it's like to be in that position. You're just trying to find whatever you can to help them manage this part of their business better.
Correct. I don't know what maybe the state can do in addition, but in the Blair County, you run it anywhere from across an employer that's anywhere from 1 or 2 employees to a couple hundred. So the resources that are available to the smaller employers aren't there, but they still experience the same workers' compensation cost per employee or per payroll is what it's rated on, that the larger employers do. So trying to get something out there that's available to everybody maybe would help, because you have companies of various sizes across the county.
And in your daily grind of this industry, this will be the last question, what's a good day when you're dealing with an employer at the end of a year when they can say, Ray, thank you?
When you've helped them out and provided a resource to them, be it answering a question, explaining to them, the impact of workers' compensation, what an experience mod does to their business, what a claim does to their business, but something that helps them out and providing an additional resource, not just outselling the product to them.
Barb?
I think when an employer has had some poor experience in the past, maybe a shock loss, maybe something that has pushed them into or motivated them into doing some more aggressive things internally. I think that because the long tail on improvement exists in workers' comp, when you finally get to that point where you can call them and say, look at this, your experience mod just went down below 1, or your
That's a good day.
Those are the good days, because sometimes they can't see that improvement right away, and I think when you actually see it on paper and it affects their bottom line, that's a good day.
All right. Barb Hoover? Ray Mergus, thank you very much for joining us. We're talking workers' compensation on the wide, wide world of workers' compensation. When we come back, we're going to visit with Safety Director Matt Holzberger from Roaring Spring Blank Book, and also occupational therapist from ProCare Physical Therapy, Andy Miller. So that's the subject coming up next with workers' comp. But in the meantime, take a look at this next statistic and see if this is an eye-opener for you and what it means to the world of employee safety. Back right after this. Welcome back to the wide, wide world of workers' compensation. I'm your host, Jim Gregory, and so far we've been talking about workers' compensation from the business owner and the therapist owner point of view. We also had a chance to hear from the insurance carrier point of view here locally, and now it's an opportunity to talk to occupational therapist Andy Miller. He is a occupational therapist for ProCare Physical Therapy. And then we also have Matt Holzberger, who is the safety director for Roaring Spring Blank Book. And I know since we started the show, we've had these instruments sitting out here on the set, and if we could take a look at what those look like. Andy, I got to tell you, some of them look pretty primitive, and I think, from what I understand, they are still used to this very day for box carrying, for push-pull, for grip testing, for all of those various tools that go into getting an employee back to work safely. Just talk about what it is that goes into being Andy Miller.
Well, I mean, the most important thing, Jim, is we do, for therapy, do job-specific rehab. Mm-hmm. So we want to try to replicate the exact same things that these employees are doing out on their job. So they're lifting bags, they're lifting crates. So that's exactly what we want to do, is replicate that actual thing right in our clinic. So if you see at the bottom is the box, we actually do lifting and carrying. Mm-hmm. With the box, we have a cart. We do pushing and pulling, replicate all the forces that they have to do. You see on the table a chalon gauge, where we actually can get the actual forces that these employees have to do on their jobs. So we can measure in pounds the forces mm-hmm. That they have to do. So those are some of the things that we use in the clinic to actually replicate what they're actually doing at their job site.
And I would imagine that using these tools successfully, getting employees back to work quickly, safely, and productively is very important for your job, Matt, as the safety director for Roaring Spring Blank Book, that you have confidence in the employees coming back to work safely and that they won't get hurt again, but also the people around them won't get hurt again. It's safety and safety.
That's correct. It's very important that when an employee goes out on the injury, that we do all we can, and we have trust in Andy and his people mm-hmm. to work with our employee to get them back to not 100%, but to work their workage percentage. Mm-hmm. That's why we have GDAs. Mm-hmm. So we know what they're pulling, what they're pushing, what they're lifting, mm-hmm. how they bend and twist. Mm-hmm. But to get them back to work in good health helps out the people around them.
Not very many companies can say they have a safety director. What got you into that? What is the future of employers maybe looking more at somebody in a position such as yours? And what does it mean to a company when they have somebody there to be able to work closely with the employees to make sure that they're working safely? There's a lot of questions in there.
Yes.
Start with why you got into it.
Why I got into it was I've been hurt on different jobs, mm-hmm. summer jobs whenever I was younger, but to be able to help employees be a safety manager is more directly working with the hourlies. Mm-hmm. So that helps out with the company being able to understand what is going on mm-hmm. out on the floor, mm-hmm. What is the atmosphere.
What's the temperature of the employees feeling as far as is the company really taking care of me? And I think that's
Correct,
where your
yes.
role is very important.
Yes, and that's where safety managers come into play when an accident occurs. We have more understanding of what that employee was doing for their job, and we also have to investigate the accident, so we are able to talk to the people around them if there's any other people involved. So it helps out in the long run to have a safety manager in the facility, so they can be more diverse on the knowledge that is going on and what employees are doing day to day.
From an insurance carrier standpoint, we were just talking to Barb and Ray, and I think one of the things I was remiss in not talking about is the introduction of safety committees for some companies. There's also an opportunity to work it that way. Are you familiar with safety committees, and what's the difference between that and what you provide? I would imagine it's more of a hands-on thing for you, but a safety committee is looking at a lot of different things.
Yes, we have a certified safety committee at Blank Book in different divisions, but as a safety committee, we can take in a whole what building we're at, and that's made up of more hourly employees compared to management. So we have a better view and more intake on what the hourly people want or what they see happening. If anything needs fixed or if there is a hazard out there, we can be more informed about that. And so that they can tell us everything looks better on paper, but we don't know exactly how it is functioned out in the plant until we get the point of view of the people doing it. So having a safety committee is a lot better than just having somebody in the office than going out and looking.
It's giving them input and feeling of ownership of their safety environment. Andy, what's it like working with Matt? What's it like working on the floor with those folks at Roaring Spring Blank Book and knowing that you're there a couple of hours a week just to try and prevent recordables as well, almost like a triage kind of situation?
Absolutely. The most important thing, I think, and Matt and I can both attest to this, is communication. Communication, if you have the communication, and it was mentioned earlier segment about the consistency of panels, consistency of care, you're going to have better outcomes. You have better communication, you have consistency with the healthcare field, you're going to have earlier re-entry, or you're going to actually have a better sustainable workforce there. So it's been a great relationship with the company, and it kind of boosts morale as well on the floor. You know, you're walking around and they're discussing, you know, their problems with you, or, you know, we're trying to do preventive care, right? Pro-care, proactive, try to be that versus reactive. Because I think, you know, if you look from the insurance aspect, the disease model for workers' comp is very, very minimal. I want to say about 2%. So we're switching over to, and we're really focusing more on the functional model aspect for workmen's compensation. So we're actually trying to be more proactive and giving them education as well as stretching programs and strengthening programs along that line.
I would imagine one of the most difficult parts of your job is if you're called into a situation with an employee, you're in the room with the employee and the physician, and it's a determination of who is going to say whether or not this employee is able to safely go back to work. Describe what that setting in the room is like and how difficult it can be and how important communication and as much information about the employee's health going back to work is so crucial to that return to work decision.
I think that goes along with the relationship, Jim. If you do not have a good relationship between the physician and the treating therapist, as well as the employer, it's going to be very difficult for them to understand what the capability or ability is of that employee. So as a therapist, if I could just speak for myself, we really base all of our decisions, our clinical judgment, on a job demands analysis. So that's after we already understand their position. You know, we do the analytical process of being able to determine what the physical abilities is for that position, and then we compare it, we match it with that employee, so we can come up with the best clinical judgment or our professional judgment of saying this person can return full duty, or is it a modified duty position or transitional duty, so we can actually make educated judgments from that.
Okay. Matt, one of the things that was on my mind is how many injuries are just so frustrating because employees just aren't paying attention. They may think they're doing something in a way that is going to be faster, and they may in their mind think they're doing it for the betterment of the company, but really they're putting themselves in harm's way, even though they're trying to. The road to you-know-where is paved with good intentions.
That's right.
How often do you, and how hard is it to really address that and avoid that with employees?
That happens a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of your injuries come from somebody taking a shortcut.
Right.
It's 20 tail and they want to get cleaned up, so they hurry up and do something, and they could have done that for 20 years. But just that one time they get caught and end up going to the doctor. And that 20 minutes is no longer there. Now they have to spend the night or day in the doctor's office. So it happens every day. You just got to push the training on this is the proper way to do that. Don't take shortcuts because you will get caught. And also with Andy and them there, the employees actually have engaged Andy and his coworkers pretty well on different things on how can I do this, how can I better my back by exercising, different programs. So they are looking out for themselves a lot more now because they have something they can go to and get more information than what we give them.
I've walked through the plant. There's a number of ergonomic improvements that you've made over the years. For employers and employees who are watching, let us know how important paying attention to the ergonomic situation of a particular job can also help.
The ergonomics of a certain job is very important to lowering injuries. A lot of our injuries are muscular. They are either bending, lifting, twisting wrong.
Right.
So what we did, we changed out a lot of our lifts with turntable style lifts. So we have brought Andy in and we made sure they are the proper distance away so we're not twisting and bending.
Right.
So now it takes a little bit for those employees to get used to that, and it's sometimes a fight in the beginning.
Right.
But later on down the road, they actually thank you and appreciate it because their back doesn't hurt anymore after 20-some years.
I would imagine that's one of the good days when you hear that for you. Andy, a good day for you?
When we get that paperwork back from the physician and it comes usually by fax and says return to work full duty, unrestricted basis, and then that employee calls you and thanking you, and that just simple thank you or that pat on the back, and knowing that you did everything you can to get them back, because in today's economical, it's a hardship sometimes for these families. If one of their father or mother or husband or wife is out of work, and knowing that you're got them back on track, that's enough for me.
We're going to take another break. Let's take a look at that one last graphic regarding carpal tunnel as we take this break. And Andy, as a certified hand therapist, is going to stay on. And then we're going to bring the next segment on and talk to Dr. Chris Linkoski. He is a specialist that deals with those kinds of injuries. And from University Orthopedics, he'll be here to talk about that. Andy can talk about it together. So we're going to take that last break, and we'll hear from Dr. Linkoski and more from Andy Miller right after this. Welcome back to the wide, wide world of workers' comp. I'm your host, Jim Gregory, and the final segment is here talking about workers' compensation in Blair County. We've covered many of the gamuts that cover and involve workers' comp, but the last one is the relationship between physician, therapist, and also the patient. but we can also talk about that relationship with the employer and how important all of that communication is in creating a successful environment for a safe return to work for you folks out there who are watching who are employees wondering, what do I need to know about workers' compensation? So joining me from University Orthopedics, Surgeon Chris Linkowski. Chris, thank you very much for joining us, and appreciate you taking the time. It's been a busy day for you. You are coming off a surgery day today, right?
I am. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
It's been a busy day, about 13 surgeries today at our surgery center, and glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. And everybody remembers Andy. He was here earlier talking with Matt Holzberger, the safety coordinator for Roaring Spring Blank Book, and an occupational therapist and a athletic trainer and also a certified hand therapist. So the combination of you two is what's really important about this segment. And let's just start off, if we can, about that word of communication. How important it is for you two to be successful and for that patient to be able to return to work after what could be either a traumatic hand injury or just a repetitive strain kind of injury, whether it's carpal tunnel or anything else that's repetitive.
It's critical. Communication is key to what we do. Not only with myself and the patient, but also with myself and the therapist. And it's a lot of times the hand therapist that really guides and helps to spark the recovery in the patient to get them back on track and to get them rehabbed and get them back to work.
Andy?
Yeah, I agree. Communication is key, and Dr. Linkowski is very good of keeping us hand therapists on our toes as well. It's not only us trying to communicate with Dr. Linkowski or other physicians, but the time that he takes away from his schedule as well to email, and he's emailing us the top research, the protocols and stuff to, we can do the same old stuff we did for 20 years ago, but he keeps us on the toes and everything's accelerated, and then, he even goes a step above too, he's like, what do you think? Do you think this is too accelerated? What do you think if we, change this protocol up a little bit? So he keeps us on his toes, and we do a lot of critical thinking and clinical thinking together as well. So it's very pivotal for the patient overall.
As we do more shows and talk to more physicians, we'll be talking to physicians from some of the other practices out there, whether it's Elite or Blair Orthopedics, and Blair Orthopedics and University Orthopedics are actually becoming one as we move forward.
We are.
And when you talk about the availability of somebody with your special skills, you're really the only one around that's doing what you do. I shouldn't leave out Dr. Gurman either, but the ability to see somebody with your specialty is very limited in this area, correct?
That's correct. There really are not many fellowship-trained hand surgeons. Some of the general surgeons or general orthopedic surgeons do hand surgery, but myself and Andy Gurman, we both did complete a year-long fellowship specializing in just hand surgery, and my practice is exclusive hand surgery, hand elbow surgery, and so it's good that I could really focus on those type of injuries and see a large amount of those injuries really helps to gain expertise in that area.
And a good portion of your work is involving injuries with workers' comp.
It is, yeah, a significant percentage of it is, absolutely.
How much of that is traumatic versus the repetitive?
It's probably about 50-50, 50% traumatic and 50% repetitive injuries. Carpal tunnel syndrome is the most common diagnosis that I will see in the office. I do see a lot of traumatic injuries, such as guys that stick their hand in industrial machines, or injuries of lacerations, tendon injuries, and cuts. Certainly a lot from the oil fields, and some very heavy traumatic injuries from the industrial equipment there.
Andy, what's your take on the employees that you see that want to get back to work quickly but also safely when it comes to hand injuries, and how much more difficult, or is it any more difficult than any other injuries? The hand just has so much in it that just makes it so much more complicated to a layperson like me.
Well, the hardest part is, I mean, we're not only dealing with the physical aspect of this person to get them functionally ready to go back to perform all their physical requirements, but there's also a psychological aspect too. So we were discussing this in the previous segment about doing job-specific rehab. So that's one of their biggest questions of return to work. Well, I don't know if I can do it. Well, if we have, you said antiquated equipment here such as this, but if we have things such as what they're doing at work, we can replicate that in the clinic. It kind of puts them at ease. And then we talked about modified duties. We talked to the employer about that, transitional duties as well. The earlier we get them back into the atmosphere of work, the better off we are.
I know you also believe in that psychological aspect of it as well.
Absolutely, that's a huge component of what we do, and any sort of injury and illness, it's psychologically stressful for anybody, and you accompany that with a possibility of lost wages or not being able to produce at your job as you used to. There's a very large psychological component to it. Certainly, one of the great things that our therapists can do, or they can alert us to any of the psychological issues or any of the obstacles that need to be overcome.
You've really grown to like this area. Living up at State College, you're down here a couple of days a month. You've also grown to, I think, have an affinity for the farming community and the injuries that you've seen from those folks as well, and how important it is for them to be able to get back to work.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of great hardworking farmers out here that unfortunately sustain some injuries, but I find that they're genuine people ready to rehab and get back to work, and that's it's a big part of the community here.
One of the interesting aspects of workers' comp is the interaction in the room when you're with a patient. You might be there, you may have information he's given you, you're going to be there together with a patient, you may be there with a case manager, maybe an HR person, and it's the question that you have to ask the employee: do you think you are ready to go back to work? How difficult is it to make that decision based on the amount of information you may or may not have?
Sometimes it's an educated guess. I think one of the advantages that I have is with having extensive experience with surgery, you can understand the typical average of how long it will take a patient to recover and to recuperate and get back to work. And certainly there will be some outliers and people will vary, but it's very very standard. For example, carpal tunnel surgery, routine carpal tunnel surgery. My patients go back to work they can go back to work in a limited capacity at a desk job doing sedentary work within a few days. Back to heavy construction and manual labor is typically 4 weeks or 5 weeks. And it's one thing that I have the conversation up front with the patient before I do their surgery, and that way the expectations are laid out, and we decide, well, about how long would we expect to be off, and I give them a range, and they we decide if that's agreeable together, and then we shoot to match that goal after the procedure.
Andy, can you talk about what it's like in the room, whether you believe that an employee can go back to work, or you need to stand up for what you know is the information, whether it's right or not too?
Absolutely, because sometimes they do come to us as a therapist. They're coming out of surgery or they're coming off an injury from somewhere, whether it's occupational health or a physician, not knowing that expectation. And so if the therapist as well does not educate that person in the time frame or the expectation for return to work, then it's a lot more difficult down the road to get them back to work. If it is carpal tunnel, 4 to 5 weeks versus not telling them up front, and it turns into a 10-week in a work conditioning program. So we definitely, it's patient education.
In the business model for you as a physician, you are an economic engine in and of yourself. How important is it for people to have an understanding of that you are available, that you are here, that you are available for patients? Are you busy enough? Do you need to be busier? Give me an idea.
That's critical. Certainly, you can never be too busy. Availability is a big component of being a successful physician. Certainly, having the ability to do the surgery and take care of the patient, being nice and having good bedside manner are helpful. Yes. But simply availability is key, and particularly for the traumatic injuries, those those injuries we want to get the patient seen right away, because they always have a lot of concern, a lot of anxiety about their injury, and you want to get them to surgery as soon as you can. So typically in our office, if you have a traumatic injury, you can be seen within typically 24 hours or 48 hours at the latest in the office, and scheduled for surgery usually within a day or so.
And then how important is it for the return to work to get a workers' comp injury patient that's had surgery into therapy and getting them moving so that they can get back to work in that time period we just talked about? How important is that window to get them in for therapy as well?
It depends, obviously, on the surgical procedure that the surgeons perform, but it's very critical. If for certain procedures, if the physician says, I want them seen within 1 or 2 days after surgery, that's what they're gonna receive.
Right.
So,
okay.
And the vast majority of my patients I haven't seen in the office about 3 days after their procedure, and with a therapist. And the key to hand surgery, the hand's all about function, and there are so many different moving parts and bones and joints that the critical aspect is to get that motion back, and that begins with rehab right away in the therapist's office, almost without exception.
One of the things that I always like to hear when I'm doing an interview is to be able to give an interview subject an opportunity to describe what makes for a good day in your profession. You were busy today. You saw patients at the very start of getting back to work, but during the course of any day you're going to see patients who you're saying goodbye to. And Andy, for you, if you could give the audience an idea of what really makes you smile about your profession, what gives you the passion to do what it is that you do?
It's just simply getting the patient back to work, getting the patient better, and getting them through that post-operative course without any problems or complications. Certainly happy when I can say bye and they're done and they don't need my services anymore. It's a good feeling.
It's a good feeling, I would think, also for the family. For that person, because the family's relying on them getting back to work as soon as possible.
Yeah. Some of my patients, are breadwinners for their family, and they really rely on them.
They're in your hands, Andy. They're in both. Pardon the pun, but I mean they're in your hands. A good day for you with one of Dr. Linkowski's patients.
absolutely same thing, and I think I mentioned this in a previous segment too. The happiest thing is a thank you, Andy. Thank you to the physician, the surgeon, and we take a lot of pride, and there's a lot of healthcare professionals, if not most of us in this area, that take a lot of pride in getting everyone back to the previous level of function. And that's what makes me happy. And it's maybe it's work, maybe it's to go bow hunting again, maybe it's to bowl, maybe whatever they come to surgery, come to therapy for, they have a goal in mind of what they want to do. So if they can do that and say, and you can get a thank you at the end.
It comes back to quality of life, I guess, too.
Sure.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When we started the show, we let everybody know that we were going to talk for a little while about the subject of workers' compensation. And hopefully, throughout the course of this show, you've realized there's so much more to it than just what you might see from an attorney pointing into your television and say, we can get money for you if you've been injured. There is so much more to it. There are so many good people involved in the process, and you've just seen and heard from two of them. So, Dr. Linkowski, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate your participation in the wide world of workers' compensation. And Andy, we'll have you back again as well. So thank you very much. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the wide world of workers' compensation.